What's up, coolers? Welcome back to another video of Talking Tiki-Taka, and in this video we are going to try to make a tactical breakdown of what happened in the match against Monaco, how the shape didn't work out, how fundamentally the way the Flick team sort of pans out and Xavi used to sort of structure his team, what's the core difference between the two, and how in context to the last match this plays a pivotal role in deciding how eventually the team shapes up when you do not have, let's say, 11 men. So the basic Flick structure is all we know, that it's a 4-2-1-3 kind of a structure, which at times starts with 4 at the back, the 2 main pivots, then we have 1 attacking midfielder up front, and also we have 3 players who are basically supporting one another, and it sometimes becomes 4-2-4, or the number 10 drops down, or even sometimes the CDMs drop down, or at times they even go up. So it's a offensive overload where the defensive midfielders go down and sometimes they support up front. So in a 4-2-1-3 structure, how I see it, Flick has 4 layers on the field. The first one being the backline, the defensive layer, and then we have the the defensive midfielders, the pivot layer. Then we have the creation layer, where basically some forwards also drop down, like Rafinha, and Lewandowski even at times sort of operates as a false 9. This is the creation layer where things happen, where you create for the front line, and this is finally the finishing layer where eventually the ball gets supplied and they eventually finish it off. Now when it comes to Xavi, as opposed to 4 layers, he used to have 3 lines: the defensive line, the midfield line, and the attacking line. And in Xavi's system, it's more about coverage and less about being compact, and that sort of created zones for the players to cover, and Xavi was pretty strict about it. He was very vocal about it. All these players need to operate in certain zones that they are pretty much in charge of, so they do not get out of their territories. And it's a fundamental difference between the two managers, two ideological differences. And when it comes to Flick being more compact, what it basically does is, for the attacking midfielders and in the creation layer, it creates more option for the players. So now let's say if all the forwards are properly man marked, then in a Flick system you have multiple options. But in Xavi's system, where the players are more widespread, or let's say they have their own specific zones to cover, then the passing options become limited, and this basically creates a problem for the player and puts a lot of pressure on his individuality, or has to do something sort of from a personal magical touch point of view. Now in the Flick system, if we come back, it's rather a little bit more option as opposed to building up, or let's say making a offensive overload. So for the midfielders in the creation layer, it is a little bit more, let's say, friendly, with a bit more passing options or creative options. Now in Flick system, what we often see is that players move out of their designated spaces, they make unmarked runs, they sort of sometimes create offensive overloads, midfielders go up. And even if we bring in a lot of defenders here, as Flick system often sees low blocks and mid blocks, then the unmarked players from the mid, they can actually cause a few surprises. And for the part of defense, it does become a bit confusing. And also at the same time, what we have seen, that players like Balde, players like the fullbacks that we have, when the players are already sort of creating an offensive overload, then the fullbacks also join the party. And this is where Kubarsi is almost like a ace up our sleeves. His passing abilities allows us to break the lines in the midfield, and this is something that has been utilized by Flick in a tremendous way, and this creates a lot of problem for the oppositions. Now we understand the Flick system and how it's different from Xavi system, and this was very important to go into the second part of this tactical breakdown. Now let's go back to square one, and let's just say how eventually we shaped up against Monaco, and how it created an issue when eventually Eric Garcia, or the pivot, one of the pivots, were no longer there for us. So let's try to understand that. So now what happens is, there is only Caicedo and Pedri in the midfield. We have our back line, we have our front line pretty much unchanged, but the main problem is Caicedo no longer can support Pedri either in creation or even going up. So Caicedo has to drop down at times, support the defensive line, and Pedri pretty much left alone with three frontline players. And Caicedo, we used to see him supporting, or the CDM, whoever is in that role, cannot support the front line or the midfield any longer because he is more concerned with the defensive duties. Only Balde maybe has the liberty to make some runs up front because he's generally, or let's say naturally, an attacking player. So the main problem is Pedri has to govern a huge area, this huge abundant space that no longer has three midfielders or three players who can control, is now entirely vacant. Caicedo cannot entirely give Pedri the support in the mentioned area, and this becomes an issue. Neither the fullbacks can fully go up front because Monaco were pressuring us so high up that it was absolutely fundamental that we had at least two attacking players or even two pivots to have more control on the mid. Otherwise, as you can see, Pedri could not handle this vast empty space, or let's say unsupported space, all by himself. So we did see Pedri being a little bit out of sorts because he was neither being able to create for the front line nor being able to entirely support the defensive line. He was losing the ball. He was not entirely sure whom to give it to because the options were limited at a certain degree, and this created the main problem where Barcelona absolutely lost control of the match in the first half. At least second half we saw a little bit better shape of the entire team, but in the first half there was pretty much nothing this alone man or the lone ranger in the mid could do for Barcelona, and this was primarily the main issue that stopped us from being effective against a 10-man Monaco. But the positive side is that this defeat and this adversity came very early into the season, the first match of Champions League, because Flick will eventually figure out if this situation again arises in the business part of the season, then how to rectify it further, how to tackle it in a more manageable way, and definitely how to reduce the dependency and overload on certain players in certain situations that I feel the Xavi system used to depend a lot on. So this was a tactical breakdown of the game against Monaco, why I feel we struggled, and why I think even though the result was not really a good one for us, but it's a good thing that it happened so early into the season, which basically gives us a lot of time to rectify it and take corrective measures from the part of Hansi Flick. So let me know if you like this tactical breakdown and want more videos like this. Thank you so much, and Visca el Barça.